For over 2.5 millennia, the galaxy had known only peace. It was not the peace of friendship, nor even of mutual respect, but the peace of weary civilizations, bound by blood-stained history and cold treaties. War had once burned across the stars, consuming entire species, leveling planets, and writing epics of annihilation in the void. But those were ancient times. The Galactic Council had risen from the ashes, a coalition of the oldest and most powerful empires, sworn to uphold order and avoid ever returning to the madness of war. They succeeded. For 2,500 years, disputes were solved through arbitration. Trade routes spanned across sectors. Technology was shared. Culture flourished. And above all, violence was abandoned. No fleet had fired in anger. No world had been bombarded. Entire generations grew old without ever knowing the scent of smoke or the shadow of fear. The Council had seen to that. It was revered as the guardian of peace, its chambers the sacred halls of diplomacy, where the fate of billions was discussed with solemn words, not weapons. Among these ancient titans of galactic civilization, one species stood out, not for its power or its history, but for its youth. Humanity. A mere few centuries ago, humans had burst onto the interstellar scene, chaotic and eager, like fireflies in a room of ancient lanterns. They brought with them noise, emotion, stories, songs, and something the Council hadn't seen in generations: ambition. Earth was offered observer status, a ceremonial seat in the Council where they could watch and learn, but not speak or vote. Most elder species saw it as a courtesy, a gesture of patience. Let the humans be entertained. Eventually, they'd settle and fade into irrelevance like so many others. But humanity didn't fade. They expanded faster than any other species had before. In just a few centuries, Earth established colonies in distant systems, built spaceports, seeded terraformed worlds, and created entire economic corridors that began influencing galactic markets. Their cultural exports spread like wildfire: literature, films, philosophies, and oddly addictive food products. Council members privately mocked their art, but many quietly downloaded Terran dramas. Still, despite their growth, humans were seen as a volatile species. Emotional. Passionate. Prone to extremes. The Council had files and psychological models that classified them as potentially disruptive, contained by cultural integration. There were whispers that humans might someday challenge Council authority, but these were dismissed. After all, the humans were quiet. Cooperative. They followed the rules. They didn't rebel, didn't provoke, didn't threaten. The fire within them, it was assumed, had gone out. What the Council never understood, what none of them ever truly grasped, was that humanity's restraint wasn't submission. It was choice. Because while humans embraced peace, they had not forgotten war. They had just buried it. Not out of weakness, but reverence. Their museums held relics of past conflicts. Their historians wrote volumes on every major battle Earth had fought. Their schools taught not just about science and politics, but about courage, sacrifice, and the cost of violence. They remembered everything, every mistake, every victory, every scream, every silence that followed. That memory shaped them. It tempered their strength. Earth didn't build weapons because it wanted to use them. It built them because it remembered what happened when others didn't. Still, the galaxy slept, wrapped in the illusion of eternal peace. And the Council, in its grandeur, believed that no species, not even humans, would ever break the great silence. Then came Talos 7. It began as a routine silence. A research colony in the Talos system failed to report in. It wasn't unusual. Communications across deep space could falter. Solar flares. Relay malfunctions. Bureaucratic delay. The Council logged it, filed a note for eventual follow-up, and moved on. But Earth didn't. Talos 7 was home to over 200,000 civilians. Families. Scientists. Children. When the pings went unanswered for 12 hours, Earth dispatched a fast response probe. When the footage arrived, there was no hesitation. No room for analysis. Talos 7 was gone. Not just damaged. Gone. Cratered, scorched, lifeless. The colony was erased, its buildings reduced to melted metal and bone dust. No atmosphere. No survivors. Orbital wreckage suggested a tactical strike, precise, overwhelming, and deliberate. Satellites captured fleeting glimpses of warships disappearing into slip space. Not pirates. Not a meteor. A message. The Council gathered in emergency session, for the first time in over 2 centuries. The chamber buzzed with analysis. Theories. Conspiracy. Denial. The prevailing argument was restraint. The attacker's identity was unclear, their motives uncertain. Some suggested it was a rogue faction. Others proposed it was a tragic accident. Earth, they insisted, must not act in haste. But Earth wasn't listening. In the halls of government back home, there was silence. Not the silence of peace, but of mourning. Entire families had vanished in seconds. Teachers. Medics. Miners. Infants who had only just learned to walk. A city that had hosted interstellar exchange programs, where alien visitors once praised the vibrancy of human curiosity, was now ash and bone. Broadcasts swept through human space, raw footage, news anchors weeping on air, relatives screaming into microphones. The shock turned to fury in less than a day. Earth demanded answers. Names. Coordinates. Justice. The Council sent condolences. That was when humanity changed. Not all at once, not with marching armies or glowing declarations, but with a simple choice. A choice to no longer wait for permission. A choice to answer loss with truth, not diplomacy. And when the Council convened once more, expecting a plea for help, they got a declaration. The human ambassador stood alone in the chamber. The screens behind him showed the faces of the dead. The silence stretched. The other species watched with disinterest, expecting anger, emotion, perhaps even a tearful appeal for vengeance. Instead, the ambassador spoke with a voice cold and measured. You tell us to be patient, to trust in your process, that justice will come, eventually. But 200,000 of our people are dust. That's not a crisis to be solved. That's a debt to be collected. We did not ask for war. But now that it's at our doorstep, we will not back down. No threats. No grandstanding. Just a simple, terrifying truth. We declare war. The chamber froze. Some thought they misheard. A declaration of war? From a species barely centuries into spaceflight? Against an unknown power? Madness. But the humans were not bluffing. They had weighed the consequences. They knew what this meant. And they chose to act. The silence that followed was not disbelief. It was fear. Because for the first time in 2,500 years, a species had spoken the forbidden words. And it was the youngest of them all. Humanity had broken the peace. And the galaxy would never be the same. The day after humanity declared war, the galaxy began to shift. Not physically, no stars moved, no planets realigned, but something deeper, something foundational cracked. A belief. A certainty. The Council had assumed no species would ever again resort to total war. Now, Earth had shattered that illusion with a single sentence. In the days that followed, Earth's intelligence networks went into overdrive. The Drenari were identified within 48 hours as the likely culprits. A militarized nomadic species that had been expelled from Council membership decades ago for violations of trade and sovereignty. They'd been quiet for years, operating in the shadows, skimming the edges of unmonitored space, probing the weak. Their mistake was targeting humanity. The attack on Talos 7 wasn't a message. It was supposed to be a warning. The Drenari wanted to assert dominance, to remind the galaxy that they were not gone, merely waiting. They picked what they thought was a soft target, remote, underdefended, full of civilians. The logic was simple: instill fear, force negotiation, gain power through terror. They hadn't expected Earth to respond with fury. Within 72 hours, Earth's military-industrial complex was fully active. Old war protocols, long archived, were reactivated. Shipyards went from half capacity to triple shifts. New conscripts were vetted, trained, and assigned to fleets within days. Automated factories began churning out weapons, armor, drones. Every resource, every political channel, every nation united under one purpose: retaliation. It wasn't conquest. It wasn't rage for its own sake. It was justice sharpened into steel. Human diplomats severed non-essential council cooperation. They informed the Galactic Council that Earth would not seek permission, sanction, or assistance. It would operate alone. Independently. Unapologetically. The Council attempted to intervene. They called emergency summits, issued communiques, proposed mediation. But Earth refused to attend. Not out of disrespect, but because they no longer recognized the Council's authority in this matter. Peace had been broken. Words were no longer the currency of consequence. The message was clear: you had your chance to stop this before it began. Meanwhile, within the Drenari ranks, the reaction was confusion. Then panic. Their leadership had gambled on a passive species, a civilization softened by centuries of comfort. They didn't expect a species that would pivot to war with such speed, coordination, and moral certainty. Drenari scouts were intercepted near asteroid belts and never returned. Listening posts reported glimpses of Terran ships, but no solid formations. The humans were coming, but they couldn't see how, or when, or where. On Earth, media outlets changed overnight. Entertainment was paused. Every screen showed updates. Not just casualty counts, but logistics, troop movements, tactical briefings. The public wasn't just informed, they were involved. Volunteers flooded enlistment offices. Retired veterans returned without request. Scientists began weaponizing peaceful tech. Civil engineers turned miners into warship fabricators. Humanity had not been invaded. It had been wounded. That difference mattered. When the first human fleet moved, it didn't target military assets. It targeted infrastructure. Communication hubs. Energy nexuses. Black site shipyards. Within hours, dozens of Drenari systems went dark. Not through planetary destruction, but precision. Humanity wasn't looking to genocide. It was there to dismantle. To remove the tools of atrocity. The Drenari tried to strike back. Fleets moved to intercept. But they never found the Terran vessels. They would arrive to empty space, disrupted satellites, or systems freshly scrubbed of their own listening posts. Occasionally, they'd stumble into human ambushes, sharp, surgical attacks that left no survivors and no patterns to predict. Captured Drenari transmission logs painted a picture of fear. Their captains didn't understand what they were fighting. Terran ships were quiet. Their technology blended old doctrines with terrifying new variables. Shield frequencies changed mid-battle. Missiles shifted targets mid-flight. Human AIs taunted intercepted comms before erasing them. No battle was the same. This wasn't brute force. It was chess with blood. The first Drenari capital ship to be destroyed was the Tornok, a behemoth once feared across 3 sectors. It vanished from records. A month later, the wreckage was found drifting near a neutron star, every escape pod intact, every crew member inside, bound, unconscious, and alive. A message was attached to the bridge core, asterisk. This is your first warning. The next won't be words. Asterisk. That message rippled across the galaxy. Not just because of its tone, but because it revealed something terrifying. Humanity was not out for extermination. It was out for understanding. For memory. For truth. And it would preserve enough of its enemies to testify. On the council floor, panic became policy. Debates raged. Some members wanted to sanction Earth. Others proposed temporary emergency powers. But the core issue remained: humanity hadn't violated a treaty. It had been attacked. It had declared war within its right. And it was executing that war with frightening discipline. Neutral species began hedging. Trading companies rerouted goods through human-protected corridors. Mercenaries stopped taking Drenari contracts. Pirate groups that once harassed Terran lanes vanished. Fear wasn't the motivator, reputation was. And then, the human broadcast. It came unannounced. Untraceable. Every major frequency hijacked simultaneously across 5 galaxies. A soldier stood before the camera, not a general, not a politician, just a woman in uniform. She held a data slate listing the names of the dead from Talos 7. She didn't scream. She didn't threaten. She spoke. You don't have to understand our pain, but you will respect it. We came to the stars to build. We opened our hands in friendship. Someone took advantage of that, and now we are closing our fists. We are not doing this because we love war. We are doing this because the ones who died deserve a voice. And we are that voice. The feed ended. And in that silence, every fleet, every capital, every council chamber came to the same realization. This wasn't an outburst. This was a campaign. There would be no negotiation. No ceasefire. Not until the perpetrators were brought to justice. Because humanity wasn't seeking conquest. It wasn't seeking retribution for pride. It was seeking justice. And it had already decided what that justice would look like. The Drenari leadership, now fractured, made one last move. A desperate attempt to capture a minor human listening post in the outer systems, hoping for leverage. They arrived with 6 cruisers. They left with none. No debris was ever found. And no one tried again. Because by then, everyone understood. Humanity had broken the peace not out of hate, but because peace had failed to protect them. And if war was the only language the stars remembered, then humanity would speak it, until they listened. The Drenari Confederacy began to collapse faster than anyone predicted. They had expected resistance, skirmishes, posturing. What they faced instead was systematic disassembly. Human forces didn't occupy. They dismantled. Not just fleets and stations, but ideology, control networks, and fear structures. Drenari strongholds that had stood untouched for centuries fell in days. The Confederacy's outer worlds went silent, not because they were destroyed, but because the humans shut off their ability to scream. Terran strategy was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. There were no endless battles. No glorious final stands. No attempts to intimidate through overwhelming destruction. Humanity came with purpose. They bypassed population centers and hit logistics. Fuel routes vanished. Supply convoys evaporated. Communication relays flickered out across entire star clusters. Drenari forces found themselves alone, starving, blind. They didn't lose ground. They lost function. Every strike was calculated. Every fleet moved with intent. Terran AI battlenets ran predictive warfare models weeks ahead, tracking Drenari deployment patterns and adjusting in real time. Human soldiers didn't linger, they struck, neutralized, and vanished. Their presence was measured in silence. Not territory held, but systems untouched by Drenari command. A map of defeat shaped not by fire, but absence. The Drenari Central Council fractured. Factions broke away, each accusing the other of provoking a force they couldn't contain. Internal sabotage became rampant. Leaders assassinated rivals to avoid blame. Dozens of colonies attempted to defect, begging Earth for mercy. Most were ignored. This wasn't about diplomacy. It was about justice. Surrender wasn't on the table. Accountability was. One high-ranking Drenari general surrendered his fleet and broadcast a plea that the children of their species not suffer for the sins of the few. Earth responded not with threats, but documentation. Every strike, every operation was paired with digital evidence of the Talos 7 attack. Logs, signatures, cross-reference data from Drenari command nodes. The implication was undeniable. This wasn't retribution. This was proof-backed prosecution by fire. Civilian casualties in the war remained shockingly low. Human forces used precision strikes and psychological operations to evacuate non-combatants ahead of assaults. Entire colonies were given warning, specific times, safe routes, exact coordinates. Those who complied were left unharmed. Those who resisted military withdrawal found their command structures erased in minutes. Drenari propaganda attempted to flip the narrative. They portrayed humans as conquerors, destroyers hiding behind a veil of justice. But the rest of the galaxy didn't buy it. Independent observers, when allowed near Terran operations, found controlled battlefields, prisoner records meticulously kept, and civilian populations relocated, not exterminated. Humanity had mastered the art of moral warfare. Every action had a reason. Every step served a verdict. The Galactic Council, now sidelined, found itself paralyzed. Officially, they were observers. Unofficially, they were terrified. Several species quietly upgraded their militaries, not to resist Earth, but to avoid being mistaken as threats. Entire diplomatic doctrines were rewritten behind closed doors. For the first time in millennia, galactic powers considered not what peace could maintain, but what Earth might judge. Then the Terran Coalition released the list. Publicly available, multilingual, broadcast to every major data network, the names of every known Drenari official involved in authorizing or covering up the Talos 7 strike. Hundreds of names. Their titles. Their locations. The worlds they lived on. Earth made no demands. It simply marked them. And the galaxy watched. In the following weeks, those marked individuals began to vanish. Some captured, some killed, others found publicly restrained with Terran insignia pinned to their uniforms. Human operatives were everywhere. No borders slowed them. No allies sheltered targets. Even Drenari-controlled media admitted, no safe haven existed. The justice Earth had promised was not abstract. It had faces. And it had reach. The effect on Drenari morale was devastating. Officers refused promotions, fearing they'd be next. Field commanders abandoned posts before orders arrived. Civilian trust in government evaporated. Worlds once loyal to the Confederacy demanded exile status. Drenari broadcasts shifted from bravado to desperation, calling for negotiation. Earth answered with silence. Not because it refused to speak, but because nothing remained to discuss. The human war engine, now fully mature, began to wind down. Not from exhaustion, but completion. There were fewer and fewer targets left. Each system taken required less effort. The last Drenari military station fell without a fight. Its commander opened all internal doors and broadcast surrender before a single Terran vessel arrived. No casualties. No resistance. The war had lasted 6 months. Not because the humans had overwhelmed the Drenari with numbers, but because they fought with absolute clarity. Every fleet moved with one objective. Every soldier knew why they were there. There was no conquest to distract them. No greed to divide them. Just the memory of 200,000 dead civilians and the conviction that such a loss would never go unanswered again. Galactic culture began to shift around the new reality. Human literature, once seen as emotional and excessive, was now studied for insight into their thinking. Military academies quietly included Terran tactics in their training. Even ancient empires began opening diplomatic backchannels with Earth, not out of fear, but respect. They saw what humanity had done with restraint. They understood what could happen without it. Earth, for its part, made no celebration. No monuments were built. No parades held. The war had been necessary, not glorious. Memorials were quietly added to Talos VI's orbit. A recording plays there now, looping endlessly. It isn't a song. It's silence. Earth didn't need to prove it was powerful. It needed to prove it would act when peace failed. And it had done so without compromising its principles. No planet was razed. No child orphaned by Terran bombs. They hadn't just defeated the Drenari. They changed what war meant. And now, the galaxy waited. Not for more violence, but for Earth's next word. The end of the war didn't bring applause. It brought silence, analysis, and recalibration. Across the stars, governments convened in hushed chambers to reassess their position relative to Earth. Not just militarily, but ideologically. The Terran campaign had redrawn invisible lines across the galaxy, lines not of conquest, but of precedent. From now on, injustice would be measured by whether Earth noticed it. Humanity didn't issue demands. It didn't reshape borders or establish colonies in conquered space. Instead, it released a series of open-source frameworks, technological, diplomatic, military, legal, manuals on precision warfare ethics, civilian protection protocols, even AI decision-making filters used during the Drenari operations. Earth made them public for everyone. They called it preventive deterrence, a doctrine that declared war should be the last resort, but when chosen, it must be unflinching, surgical, and absolute. Many believed this was soft power disguised as benevolence. But the documents were real, unredacted, and proven to work. Smaller civilizations, ones long at the mercy of greater empires, began adopting Terran methods. Some out of fear, most out of admiration. They saw a new model of security. Not built on fleets, but on clarity of purpose. Earth had made war terrifying again, not because it was reckless, but because it was efficient and morally certain. Meanwhile, the Drenari remnants dissolved. The Confederacy ceased to exist as a governing entity. Its archives were released by Terran intelligence to council oversight committees. Data caches filled with records of extortion, silent occupations, biological testing on border species. Crimes overlooked for generations because they had occurred in dark corners, away from political inconvenience. Earth had not just removed a threat. It had exposed a rot. No species wanted to be next. Council authority, once unquestioned, fractured. Many member states demanded reforms. How had an outlaw power been allowed to build again in secret? Why had Talos 7 been unprotected? Why hadn't the Council acted first? These weren't questions from fringe worlds. They came from core systems, long believed to be the foundation of galactic diplomacy. And beneath every inquiry was the same unspoken thought: Earth acted because no one else did. Internal audits followed. Intelligence networks were purged. Several council officials were removed after evidence surfaced of financial ties to Drenari firms. Old alliances crumbled. The illusion of neutrality collapsed. Peace wasn't a shared value, it had become a fragile compromise propped up by inaction. Earth didn't exploit the chaos. Its representatives returned to council chambers, calm and direct. They didn't posture. They presented only one statement, delivered by the same soldier who had read the names of the dead. Let this be the last time words are ignored until bodies speak louder. No threat. No rhetoric. Just a line drawn. Council members, shaken, proposed the Terran doctrine be incorporated into official security frameworks. The vote passed with record speed. Earth declined veto rights, declined enforcement privileges. It didn't seek authority. It demanded accountability. And in doing so, forced every other power to consider what they'd do if they ever stood where the Drenari had. Humanity's economy, while strained during the war, rebounded swiftly. Allied species offered trade deals, research agreements, even cultural exchanges. Some were motivated by strategic alignment. Others by genuine respect. Earth accepted carefully. Selectively. It understood now that every partnership would be weighed not just by value, but by alignment of principle. Back on Talos 7, life resumed. Survivors rebuilt with Terran support. But the planet was no longer a remote colony. It became a symbol. Not of victimhood, but of consequence. Students were taught the timeline. Artists captured the silence that followed the declaration. Architects redesigned its capital with Terran and local motifs side by side. It was not a shrine. It was a promise, carved into stone and sky. The families of the dead received personal messages. Not generic condolences. Individual letters from service members, engineers, leaders. Every life lost had been noted, honored, and avenged with discipline, not rage. Grief had been refined into action. Not even the most hardened Terran cynics could deny that the response had meaning beyond blood. The wider galactic community watched Earth's restraint with wary admiration. No occupation zones. No extraction of resources. No parades of dominance. Just a precise re-entry into interstellar diplomacy, with boundaries now clearly defined. Earth would not seek conflict. But it would never again wait for permission to respond. Terran militaries did not demobilize completely. They scaled back, restructured, and redeployed in deterrent roles. Defense pacts were offered to neighboring species, but only under strict mutual terms: no aggression, no provocation, and full transparency. These pacts were not empire building, they were shields, shared by those who had once felt alone in the void. The war changed Earth as well. Not politically, its unity had held, but culturally. Humanity's art, literature, and even humor shifted. Not darker, but sharper. Reflective. Satirical works exploded in popularity, dissecting the absurdity of having to explain morality with missiles. Museums opened dedicated to the war's ethical framework. Children grew up knowing not just what had happened, but why it mattered. They were taught that silence in the face of injustice is not peace. It is neglect. Other species began to adapt similar models. Formerly passive governments issued stronger protections for their frontier colonies. Some initiated interspecies watchdog organizations, many using Earth's open-source AI monitoring systems. Not to prepare for war, but to prevent the need for it. In a strange twist, war had reignited a proactive peace. The Drenari diaspora scattered. Some assimilated. Others attempted to hide. Earth pursued only those directly involved. No witch hunts. No cultural blame. Just surgical pursuit of accountability. It was this restraint that shocked the galaxy most. Earth had the justification to destroy, and yet chose discipline. And in that choice, Earth reshaped its image from emerging power to moral authority. Not perfect. Not infallible. But unwilling to sit still while the innocent burned. Long after the last shot, long after the wrecks of Drenari's ships drifted silently in forgotten systems, the message endured. Not through threat. Not through fear. But through example. The galaxy had seen what it meant when humans believed in something enough to break a peace they themselves cherished. They hadn't done it for conquest. They hadn't done it for glory. They had done it because justice demanded action, and they were the only ones willing to pay the cost. Years passed, but the echo of the war remained. Not as tension, but as a benchmark. In every council meeting, negotiation, or treaty, the phrase, Terran Standard, became shorthand for integrity backed by action. Where once Earth had been seen as young and unpredictable, it was now treated with the wary respect afforded to a force that had demonstrated both unmatched restraint and uncompromising conviction. Humanity didn't expand rapidly. It didn't need to. The strength it had displayed wasn't in territory or numbers, it was in clarity of purpose. Other civilizations began modeling their doctrines around Terran principles. Military academies restructured training, legal systems updated policies on war crimes, and even non-military alliances began referencing Earth's example when outlining terms of mutual defense. Not out of submission, but acknowledgement. Earth had proven what power should look like when wielded with purpose and control. New alliances emerged. Not bound by fear of attack, but shared values. Smaller species, long considered insignificant, found themselves welcomed into coalitions led by Terran diplomats, scientists, and humanitarian coordinators. Earth wasn't offering protection in exchange for loyalty. It was offering a seat at the table, provided ethics outweighed ambition. That alone redefined interstellar diplomacy. The Council was no longer the sole authority. A new forum formed, an interspecies ethical review body, not enforced by power, but by consensus. And though Earth never claimed leadership, its influence was undeniable. Whenever conflict sparked in remote regions, the question asked was no longer, "Who can we align with?" but, "What would Earth tolerate?" This quiet influence made some uneasy. A few empires accused Earth of soft domination. But when pressed, none could cite an instance where Earth had used its position to extract favors, resources, or control. It remained stubbornly a civilization that preferred principled order over opportunistic gain. And because of that, its presence alone reshaped expectations across thousands of systems. Talos 7 became more than a symbol. It turned into a cultural axis. Annual gatherings were held in orbit, attended by delegates of dozens of species. Not as a spectacle, but as a remembrance. The atmosphere was solemn, focused, deliberate. No celebration, no spectacle. Just reaffirmation. That peace must be protected, but justice must never be deferred. Survivors told their stories. Not of suffering, but of how their lives became the line Earth refused to let be crossed. Their testimonies weren't pleas. They were the foundation of a galaxy that had finally stopped pretending neutrality was a virtue when innocent lives were at stake. Back on Earth, the war left its mark not as triumph, but as a deep awareness. Policies shifted toward long-term interstellar integration. Educational institutions emphasized diplomatic fluency, ethical philosophy, and comparative governance. Military development continued, but under strict review. Each new advancement weighed not only for its utility but for the moral implications of its use. A new generation came of age. They hadn't lived through the attack or the war, but they carried its lessons in their worldview. They were less concerned with domination and more with balance. Not idealists, but pragmatists trained to recognize when peace was being used as a shield for inaction. They didn't flinch at complexity, they studied it. Humanity's cultural exports became influential in unexpected places. Stories once seen as emotional indulgence began to resonate across alien populations. Artifacts of Earth's struggle with loss, resilience, and moral courage spread through markets, libraries, and broadcasts. Not as propaganda, but as shared experience. Even species with vastly different biologies found common ground in the universal truth. A line must be drawn somewhere. The Drenari, broken and scattered, were not erased. Earth permitted their cultural restoration, so long as it was separated from the machinery of oppression. Former Drenari scientists and educators were reintegrated under civilian oversight, monitored but not silenced. Earth didn't just defeat them, it forced them to choose who they would become without power shielding their faults. Some resisted and faded. Others rebuilt with transparency. New policies were introduced galaxy-wide. Unmonitored weapons development was banned by coalition vote. Independent AI warfare systems were restricted. Universal war crime archives were established, maintained by multi-species panels. These were not Earth's rules, they were Earth's example, adapted by those who saw what inaction had once cost. Even species who had stayed silent during the Talos 7 attack began to voice regret. Not for guilt's sake, but from reflection. Silence had nearly cost them their place in a galaxy reshaped by consequence. They learned that neutrality is not a moral high ground when it serves only to protect one's comfort at the expense of others' survival. Human veterans of the war returned to quiet lives. They weren't treated as legends but as stewards. They spoke rarely, acted decisively when consulted, and held communities to high standards. Not through authority, but through example. They didn't glorify war. They remembered it exactly as it was, necessary, targeted, and unbearable. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been its fleet. It was its refusal to let pain be normalized. Across the stars, military parades gave way to forums. Covert alliances gave way to open pacts. Fewer wars erupted, not out of fear of retaliation, but because values had shifted. The threshold for tolerating injustice lowered. Proactive diplomacy increased. Intelligence networks began focusing on pre-conflict resolution rather than sabotage. Earth did not build an empire. It built a reputation. One so clear, so deeply etched into history, that it did more to prevent war than any superweapon ever had. Peace now had a cost, yes, but so did silence. And that balance changed everything. The legacy of the conflict wasn't dominance. It was alignment. Earth had shown that power means nothing unless it's disciplined by principle. That the only thing more dangerous than a ruthless enemy is a righteous one who has run out of patience. And so, when Earth spoke now, the galaxy listened. Not because it feared Earth, but because, for the first time, it understood what it meant when a species decided to act not out of self-interest, but because someone had to.